I think crypto, I mean, whether it's Bitcoin or whatever else, I think that, it is really an existential threat for some politicians. And I think that the on-ramp, off-ramp stuff is sort of the funniest thing I've ever seen, because you have the sort of Bitcoin people sort of trying to defend the fact that they're trying to make a business out of this, and then also sort of like negotiate and work with governments. And I don't know how people feel about like the Winklevoss, for instance. I read this book in prison called Crypto Dad.
We called him the
The Winklevi, right. I read this book in prison called Crypto Dad about Commissioner Giancarlo, who I think I'm gonna work with him and his law firm to help me a little bit. But like this sort of like weird like compromise of like let's let Bitcoin either be regulated, or like this sort of pseudo regulation that occurs at the on ramp off ramp level. I don't know how people feel about that, but it's like such a strange thing to me, and I don't know.
Yeah,
it's funny because Chainalysis is one of the most successful startups in the space, and all it is a company that simplifies. I mean, it's really sad. It's kind of like, to be honest, I think a big chunk of the company is. I know they have other features, but a big chunk of the company is just a small piece of software that just makes it easy for you to follow a chain a little bit further than you could maybe by persistently clicking or following something in Excel. You can click and sort of follow it more easily. It's really simple software. I know they do something else more exotic than that, but regardless, that's one of the biggest companies in the space, because their customer is law enforcement and government, which I have very little fondness for, and it's frustrating to see this prospect of free money. And it's just sort of, in America, like, we have the worst of both worlds. We don't have law enforcement kind of when we need it, and we're sort of, for example, in crypto scams or something, we law enforcement isn't too useful, but then we also have law enforcement peeking up our skirt when we don't want them to. So it's like, I'm not sure if we're going forwards or backwards here with the way that the government's sort of like using Bitcoin. It's almost even better as a surveillance tool than some of the other assets.
It's temporary, Martin. There's a lot of stuff that's routing around it. You can use confidential transactions and aspects of Bitcoin, and I think Lightning and other big things that are coming are going to literally route around the government's ability to watch.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. Look at the Zappos guys we were talking about a second ago. But then, like, I think some people actually think it's both government, but it's also banks, which are kind of like, I mean, depending on who you ask, it's probably not too unrealistic, actually, that a lot of banks are government appendages. In some countries, they literally are. But even in our country, we know JP Morgan is sort of both a revolving door and and oftentimes sort of a part of the government. And so if you're really egotistical, which I think somebody was saying earlier, which is totally, I think, true, you might think that, the banks actually are after you because you're going to screw up their business with MakerDAO, which is laughably, JP Morgan's not going anywhere anytime soon. No matter how fast blockchain technology advances, we're going to still have banks in 10 or 20 years. So it'd be really, really the height of arrogance to think that the banks don't like me and the government doesn't like me and I'm disrupting their stuff. So, they're all going to get me. I mean, unfortunately, I think a lot of this innovation comes with personality disorders like that. I have a lot of friends that think that the government's after them. I know that one of you guys mentioned that as well. Like, a lot of Bitcoin and crypto people say that all the time, and there's no evidence of it whatsoever. And I don't want to rain on anybody's parade that says that, because to actually have the U.S. government after you is a feeling I know, and it's not a positive one. So I think for a lot of people it's exhilarating, and it gives them a meaning and purpose that they couldn't get if they were a programmer at Amazon or something like that. Literally, the singer Sarah Bareilles, who did that song, I don't want to sing you a love song because something or other. She had one hit like 10 years ago. Like, I don't know if this person is relevant at all, but like she's the first prominent voice to say she's quitting Twitter because that's the best part, is that instead of deleting her account, she's saying, I'm leaving, I'm deleting my account. It's like, no, when you delete your account, then you've deleted your account. Until now, you're grandstanding. When people wanted to leave America, when Trump won. I was like, listen, I'll escort you out. Like, let's go. Where do you want to go? I'll buy you a ticket to Toronto. Let's get out of here.
You can use my frequent flyer miles.
I
To
mean,
be fair to Sarah, she did do a play on Broadway in the last 5 or so years, something like that. That was fairly popular, but it wasn't that big a deal.
didn't anybody ever tell these people that, like, your actions speak way more louder than your words? Just, like, literally press delete. People are like, oh, where'd Sarah Bareilles go? And then you could say, well, I deleted it because of Elon Musk. You don't do the opposite. You don't say, oh, I'm leaving, guys. I'm going to really draw out this leaving process, though. And, you know,
When was the last time she was written about in any kind of media article?
it's sort of like Lena Dunham, was it? Or a few other people like that when Trump was elected, that they were going to leave America. And it's like, you're clearly... And I bet you this woman's not going to delete her Twitter. She's probably going to be like, you know, try to milk this some more. Like, just to press delete if you're that upset. Like, you know, don't say anything. Press delete, and you know, it's so sad. Like, the message is more important than the action.
What platform are they going to?
Yeah, that's another good point.
Well, they liked the money that it brought them.
I think they're like joining the lawsuit.
They're probably holding more XRP than their customers.
I think the amicus briefs are, you know, I mean, if anybody doesn't know how they work, they're just sort of probably joining in general, trying to sort of fight the SEC across more foundational law than...
For all their other coins.
Yeah, there's a bigger fight here than just... and this is the fight, right? Like, whether or not the SEC beats Ripple will basically determine whether or not what the SEC can do against everything. It's like very, very foundational. You know, this law is going to set the law of the land, basically. I think people don't understand how important it is, to be honest. I think, like, there is a law of diminishing returns with attorneys. I think that there's only so much legal advice you can get. At some point, it's just a judge and a court thing, and this one's really tricky. I don't know how it's going to play out. You would think a settlement. I mean, the SEC's probably... They never lose, but if they lose here, it opens up the floodgates for case law that just says you can do what you want in crypto, basically.
Right. Yeah. I'm just curious how you might see the SEC differentiating between XRP and Ethereum, if at all.
If there's a loss, I mean, I think people will. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know enough to say, but I would think anytime the SEC loses, it's very rare. They lost this case, SEC v. Liu, at the Supreme Court, which is really, really big, where they basically, this new Supreme Court, who I happen to love, maybe outside of Roe v. Wade, which I'll just say for political convenience, but they've done a really great job of dismantling a lot of the government's BS. And SEC v. Liu and AMG, which is the FTC case, AMG v. FTC, both went against the government and completely wrecked like two major institutions of government, where now the FTC can't use equitable monetary relief and the SEC at all, and the SEC can't use it as a disgorgement tool. They basically said disgorgement isn't a legal concept. You have to, you can only claw back what was lost, not just whatever you want. And it was a really big win for anybody who likes freedom, and a really big loss for the FTC. So if they lose Ripple, it's like, I don't know exactly what standard that sets. Like, does that make every coin legal? Does that make, I don't know exactly, what precedent it sets, but it could make ICOs de facto legal, which would be a pretty big one. I wish I knew more. I just know how big the case is and how important it is in DC. Like, if the FTC beats Ripple, they're gonna use that case law that they established and go after Ethereum, or go after even, who knows, they could do whatever they want. Having a win in the pocket, they'll be sort of galvanized to, I think, continue litigation. But this is the big test case, right? And once they have this precedent, all they have to do is prove that you looked even remotely like Ripple and you're toast. Or vice versa, right? If they lose the precedent, all you have to do is you looked remotely like Ripple and now you're in the clear. So this thing has got pretty huge impact on crypto. I don't know what the timelines are for a decision or anything, but I think they are drawing to a close. Of course, there'll be an appeal and everything as well. It sounds like that's what's going to happen, and I think that it's amazing. Clarence Thomas is like holding the entire world up against his arm, like a stiff arm of a football player or something like that. If you can imagine that, like this is the one man that like is standing against millions of people. In some cases,
Alito too, though. You got to give it to Alito.
Sure, but you know Clarence's SEC versus Lou case, where so basically Lou is a scam artist, and Lou raised $40 million, let's say, from investors to start a cancer center. He stole 3 or 4 million of it, right? But he actually spent a lot of it on the cancer center. The SEC says you got to pay 40. He says, "What are you talking about? I have to pay 3, the 3 that I stole." They said, "No, you got to pay all 40." And he lost at the district court. He lost at the appeals court, and the Supreme Court said, "You guys are just making this up. You don't have the right to ask him for 40. You can ask him for the 3. That's the right Congress gave you, and that's it." And this has been like law for 100 years. And then for the FTC, it's even funnier. They said the FTC has no ability to get any money from anyone at any time, which is really hilarious because Facebook paid the FTC $5 billion to end a litigation. The FTC has no power other than to say, "You're a monopolist, please stop." And that's it. They can force you to stop, but that's really the only power they have. They don't have any power to say, "Give us $1 billion," or "You've wronged consumers by $2 billion." They just made up this power on their own. And people just went with it.
I have always been amazed at their ability to just find out of nowhere these companies with no redress or court order or anything. They just find it, and they decide to find them, like the banks. I mean, like Wells Fargo, look at what they had to pay.
Oh, that's even better. This new agency, the CFPB, completely unconstitutional. And this is where I was going with this, which is there's this crazy law precedent called, Humphrey's Executor. And Humphrey's Executor basically allowed the creation of the
Humphrey's
FTC.
Executor is the name of my wiener. Martin, just so you know.
Humphrey's Executor was found that the FTC was constitutional. And Clarence Thomas, in his dissent on the SEC v. Lou, he said, not only do I think we didn't go far enough in the SEC, he was sort of hinting that he felt the SEC and the FTC were unconstitutional. And if you think about his logic, it makes a lot of sense. He's basically saying that these entities are extrajudicial, they're extra-governmental. They're not in one of the 3 branches of government. They certainly aren't courts. They certainly are not a part of Congress. They're supposed to be a part of the executive branch, but here's the rub. The president cannot fire people on the FTC. You get a 7-year term. So there's kind of, I hate to use the word deep state, but like they're people that basically can't be told what to do. If the head of the FTC up royally, Lena Khan is her name at the moment, they can't say, "Oh, Lena, you have to step down from the FTC." She says, "I get 7 years. You can't tell me what to do, Mr. Biden, President Biden." And that's that. And so what branch of government is that? That's not the executive branch. You serve at the pleasure of the president. That's not Congress. You get reelected every year. She never got elected by anybody. And certainly not the courts. So it's this 4th branch of government. And so he's basically saying if he gets a chance, he's going to actually make the FTC illegal and possibly even the SEC. Of course, the SEC was appointed by Congress, but even when Congress does things, that doesn't make them legal. They still have to be constitutional. So
Getting the SEC would be amazing.
yeah, I think the SEC does a lot of good things, but I certainly am no fan of them at the moment. But it'd be weird without the FTC, right? Where would we file publicly traded companies file their financial documents, all kind of stuff like that would be.
Well, wouldn't they just change the structure? They'd call it the FTC and then make it actually part of the executive.
Right. I mean, all they have to do is basically let the commissioners be fired by government, which would be fine, right? I mean, and right now the SEC, I believe the SEC commissioner can be fired by the president. It never tends to happen, but I do believe that the SEC has its own is less legally questionable than the FTC, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he's like the most powerful black man in our country's history, arguably, and he's a Republican. He's really unafraid of his opinion. I don't even agree with all of his opinions, but man, like he takes no prisoners. You know, you got to respect him. I got GPT-3 or no Dolly to make me and Nancy kissing photo or cartoon.
Oh my god.
That's the beauty of this software. You can whatever your mind desires.
So disturbed by all you guys right now. Just like my face. I'm just like, oh.
Becca, she has. Hey Martin, speaking of Frazzle Drip, I do have a question. So your whole thing kind of got set off when Hillary Clinton tweeted about you. Do you think that she has that this is like a common strategy by the Democratic Party and the Clintons generally, or?
It's funny you say that, and I try to be as sort of sober and, like I said, as little conspiratorial as I can be. I think that maybe it's an epiphenomenon. And so instead of like, oh, Hillary Clinton's important or is relevant or can, God forbid, is some kind of, Illuminati that, can get people canceled or deleted or killed even or prosecuted or whatever. I actually think she's sort of more of a signaling apparatus where, and it's nothing to do with her. It's more about like she's a sign of bureaucratic authority and, for lack of a better term, goals for a lot of people. Like to be somebody who's sort of a relative nobody and then becomes Secretary of State or a senator through sort of politics is the life goals of hundreds of bureaucrats, or millions, I should say, of bureaucrats. And like, so somebody disrespecting her, it's less about her, you're disrespecting the process that they have all decided to go down. And these are judges, prosecutors, lawyers of all kinds, politicians of all kinds, often lawyers in the first place. So you're sort of messing with a whole tribe of people, whether it's right or left or whatever. And I think that, when you sort of put your middle finger up to authority and say, I don't really care about your so-called authority, I don't think you have any authority, you're sort of basically asking for them to prove that they still do and that they can do something to you. And from my naive perspective of like, well, she's not elected, right now she's trying to become the president, and I think there was this sort of like, oh, we can't have somebody doing that to authority. And it's like, I don't know, it's this sort of weird synthesis where there's this merger of the courts, which are actual authority, right? The courts can put you in prison. The courts can force you to do something. But also not just the courts, but the people that appoint the judges. It's sort of this interconnectedness, which I never sort of thought existed. And maybe I'm just naive and stupid. But I always thought they're, kind of the stuff that we were taught, which is, well, we have three branches of government and they're separate and this and that. And I've sort of come to learn that, it's kind of one government with three, to call them separate branches is probably a bit far. They're relatively more interconnected than maybe we think. And there's a lot of sort of branch hopping from one to the other. And I think you're right that there's this temporal association with sort of politicians and watching sort of different bad things happen to me. But, I still hope and hold out some, again, pathetically naive hope that that's sort of all just a coincidence.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because they did the same thing with Jones, Alex Jones. She tweeted out that he's Trump's right brain, and then it was about a week later that the parents of the San Diego family showed up at a lawyer's office and filed lawsuits 7 or 8 years after it happened.
She did it with this policy attacker narrative too.
As much as I don't like her, I still think there's this, it's beyond her, right? It's, it's just any kind of authority that people want to show is not the authority. That's a direct challenge to keeping that authority. So you have to put down that rebellion whenever and wherever you can.
Dude, thank you.
Well, look at Trump. I mean, he's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to pay your dues. You're supposed to, the fastest you're supposed to do it is someone like Kennedy or Obama, where, okay, you're a political phenom or AOC, you're going to get popular, but hey, kid, you're still going to pay your dues. Look how patronizing people are to AOC when, she's doesn't have much technical power on paper, but she's arguably one of the most popular politicians ever. I don't like her policies, but one can't disagree that she's popular and a mover and a shaker. But there's still that patronizing in the House and the Senate of, oh, you just got here, you know, we're the old heads. And I don't know, it sickens me, and I'm happy, even though I don't like Trump, from his like obvious like intellectual deficiencies and like lots of other problems he has. Like at least he's not part of this horrible, stupid system. And like it's almost like the poison you know is better than the poison you don't.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, like, just the last comment on Hillary specifically. I thought it was interesting during the Trump administration, or when she was running against him, and if you watch the tweets, because this whole Russia narrative is unwound, you can kind of see behind the curtain. It seems like she got a heads up on the Alpha Bank narrative that she fed the media and then tweeted out something. So I wonder if, like, a lot of that, what looks like her tweeting and then things happening, is that she knows that something's going to happen in the background. Like, she knew that they were going to go after you, and so she made you a target. Or with Jones, she knew they were going to start going after him, so she made him a target. Same with, like, Trump and the Alpha Bank stuff.
I guess the only thing I'm happy for is that reason prevails among the populace, and that she lost, and that, you know, the biggest embarrassment of losing to Trump is like, you really couldn't be more embarrassed as a politician, and somebody that is so flawed and so, you know, not good at politics, you know, or shouldn't be on paper the winner, beat the crap out of her, and it's so delicious. Again, not maybe great for the country. We probably could have found somebody better than Donald Trump, but like the general, like, you know, the message for a lot of people gave up on her and gave up on, you know, politics in general, when like this is the choice we have. You know, people like her and other sort of lifelong bureaucrats that, I mean, there are people that respect people like that, and others that, you know, dedicate their lives to quote unquote public service, which is amazingly lucrative, evidently, this public service. I should think about getting into it. I didn't know you can make hundreds of millions of dollars as a public servant.
Yeah, yep, you can.
Yeah, it's hard to go to trial. It's funny. It's one of the things that I'd love to expose someday, although I'm not sure, again, not to be a conspiracy theorist or something, I'm the opposite of that, but like, the government doesn't want you to ever go to trial, because that's why 95% of people plea. Not that we should be talking about criminal justice. I want to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, but I appreciate it. I got a lot of cred in prison for actually going to trial. There's a thing that a lot of guys in jail say. It's kind of a jail term. They say pick 12, which literally, you know, means if you have the guts to tell the prosecutor, pick 12, meaning I'm not going to deal with you. I'm not settling. I'm not pleading guilty. Find 12 jurors and let's do it that way. And it's one of the most, like, you know, the government actually punishes you for doing this. Alan Dershowitz, who was, speaking of Jeffrey Epstein, I think it was Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer and friend. Dershowitz wrote a long story about this, that, you know, you should be able to go to trial without being punished. You know, it's sort of like a really ridiculous thing where it's gotten to the point where if you dare to go to trial, you end up doing more time because you're expected to just plead guilty. They caught you and that's it. There's no possible way you could be innocent. So anyway, I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I was just listening to this stuff. The MakerDAO stuff is really interesting, and just wanted to pop in and listen more than talk.